All right, strap in, everyone, because today we are going deep into philosophy land.
Yeah, we are.
We're going to be talking about schemas.
Schemas.
And I think this will be a good deep dive for anyone who's into philosophy.
I think so too.
So,
Yeah.
you know how in philosophy we're always sort of like wrestling with these huge concepts like infinity and stuff?
Yeah.
But like our language is finite.
Yes, it
It's
is.
kind of weird to think about that.
Yeah, how can we talk about such huge concepts with
Yeah.
such a small amount of tools?
Like fitting the ocean into a teacup.
That's right.
Well, so that's where schemas come in, right?
Yes.
So we're going to be basing this deep dive on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on schemas.
Excellent source.
Yeah, I think it's a great source.
Yeah.
So have you ever thought about how we can talk about, like I was saying, infinity
Yeah.
with finite language?
That's a great question.
Yeah, schemas can help us do that.
That's right.
So what is a schema?
Well, I like to think about it like a blueprint or a mold that lets us make any number of sentences or arguments or even mathematical statements
Okay, so like
just from a template.
so like a schema isn't like a sentence itself.
Right.
It's like the blueprint for the sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. So what does a schema blueprint look like?
So let's look at Tarski's Schema T.
Okay.
It's a very famous one.
Okay.
The template is
Okay.
blank is a true sentence if and only if blank.
Okay.
And then the side condition is
Okay.
that we fill the second blank with a declarative sentence
Okay.
and the first blank with a name for that sentence.
So for example, like
Yeah.
grass is green is a true sentence.
Right.
If and only if grass is green.
That's right. That is one instance of Schema T.
Gotcha.
But we can create many more
Right. So it's
by
like
plugging in different sentences.
it's not a sentence. The
It's-
schema itself. It's like a
Yeah.
blueprint for a sentence.
Yeah.
And this reminds me a lot of like
Yeah.
open sentences in math. How is this different
Yeah, that's a great question.
from an open sentence?
So an open sentence in math, like x plus y equals y plus x.
Yeah.
That's really about a relationship between variables
Right.
that range over numbers.
Oh.
A schema, like let's say the commutativity schema in number theory,
Okay.
that operates on a different level.
Okay.
So that uses a template,
What?
open parenthesis x plus y close parenthesis equals open parenthesis y plus x close parenthesis,
Okay.
where x and y are placeholders for numerals,
Okay.
not variables.
So it's
So it's about creating well-formed sentences.
it's not so much about the relationship between the values.
Yes.
It's about the structure of the sentence
Yes,
itself.
exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it's like the schema is shaping language.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
are all schemas like this?
Well, no, there are different types of schemas.
Okay, what are the different types of schemas?
So there are sentence schemas, which we've already talked about. There are subsentential schemas.
Those intentional schemas.
Yes, and there are argument text schemas.
Argument text schemas. Okay. So what is this subsentential schema?
So that would be something like the successor of A,
Okay.
where the side condition would specify that A is replaced by an Arabic numeral.
Okay, so for example,
An instance would be the successor of 9.
okay, so it's like it's giving you part of a sentence.
Yes,
Not the whole sentence.
exactly.
Okay, cool. And then what was the last one?
The argument text schemas.
Argument text schemas. Okay.
So for example, modus ponens,
Modus ponens. Okay.
a very famous one.
Yeah.
So the schema looks like this.
Okay.
A,
Uh-huh.
if A, then B,
Okay.
therefore B.
Okay, so it's like that classic,
Yeah,
if P, then QP, therefore Q.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
But it's written in this sort of schema format.
right. And the side condition would be that we replace A and B with declarative sentences in English,
Okay.
ensuring that both occurrences of A and B are replaced by the same sentence.
So the schema, like, captures the logical structure,
Exactly.
no matter what the content is.
Right. It doesn't matter what the content is,
It's just the structure.
just the structure.
Okay, so this is really making me realize how much we take for granted when we just talk and reason.
Yeah,
Like, we're using schemas all the time and we don't even know it.
it's true.
Yeah, so, okay, so that's like how schemas work in, like, regular language.
Right.
How about in more formal systems, like first-order logic?
Well, schemas are essential there, too,
Yeah.
for defining axioms and inference rules in systems like first-order logic.
Okay, so they're like,
Yeah, they provide a blueprint for an infinite number of axioms
okay.
that follow a certain pattern.
So rather than having to, like, list every single axiom,
Exactly.
you could just have the schema.
You got it.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So can you give me an example from number theory?
Sure, so the induction principle
Inductions.
is a perfect example. In a first-order formalization,
It's represented using a schema.
Huh?
Each instance of the schema applies the principle to a different property of numbers.
Now, I've also heard about the second-order induction axiom.
Right.
How does that relate?
Okay, so in second-order logic, we can express the induction principle with a single axiom, which is the second-order induction axiom.
Okay.
But that comes with all the baggage of second-order logic.
Okay.
The schema is more flexible within a first-order system,
Okay.
but it requires an infinite number of instances.
Right. So it's kind of a trade-off.
Right.
Do you want like the big, powerful axiom or do you want the little schemas?
Exactly.
Okay. And I'm guessing this choice like has implications for what we're committed to like ontologically.
Yes, it does.
Right.
So using schemas might offer us a way to be more economical
Okay.
with our ontological commitments in the object language,
Okay.
but it might increase our commitments in the meta language.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a subtle issue.
Yeah. This is giving me a lot to think about. Yeah, I know it's a lot.
We've gone from like
Yeah.
simple sentences to the foundations of math,
That's right.
and now we're talking about ontology.
That's philosophy for you.
Wow, this is great.
It is.
Okay, I think my brain needs a break.
Okay.
But when we get back, I want to talk about how schemas connect to truth,
All right. Sounds good.
because I think that's really interesting.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll be back soon.
All right. See you then.
Okay, so my brain is like back online now.
Good.
We've talked about schemas in logic and math.
Right.
Now I want to talk about how schemas connect to the concept of truth.
Oh, yeah. That's a juicy one.
Yeah, this is like, how do we understand the world?
Right.
So,
How do we know it's true?
yeah. And the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, like, really highlights Tarski in this.
Yes.
Um,
Tarski's super important here.
Remind me, what was Tarski's, like, main insight with schemas?
Well, Tarski used his schema T,
Yeah.
you know the one we talked about earlier, to try to like pin down a definition of truth.
Oh.
So he argued that like any good definition of like a true sentence
Okay.
in a particular language
Yeah.
should have all instances of schema T as consequences.
Okay, so, like, the schema T, like, isn't a definition of truth.
Right.
But it's like...
It's like a test.
Yes.
Like if your definition of truth doesn't agree with schema T,
doesn't work with schema T,
then it's probably not a good definition.
and it's probably wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like a
Yeah.
it's like a constraint on our definition of truth.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, how does this relate to all those, like, debates about,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
what is truth?
Right. All the classic philosophical questions about truth.
Yeah. Does this help us solve those debates, or does it just, like,
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it solves the debates.
give us a new way to talk about them?
Yeah.
And-
It definitely gives us a new way to talk about it.
Okay.
Like it gives us a very powerful tool to formalize
Okay.
how we think about truth.
Okay.
And by like representing these truth conditions through schemas,
Yeah.
we can like analyze the
That's fair.
structure of our claims
Sure.
about the world.
Okay, so it's not so much about finding, like, the one perfect definition of truth.
Right.
It's more about...
It's more about like analyzing it
Yeah.
in a more rigorous way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's something that's been bugging me.
Okay, what is it?
The Stanford Encyclopedia talks about how schemas have this
Right.
mixed ontological status.
Yes. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah.
And I think it gets to the heart of, like,
Well-
what makes schemas so interesting philosophically.
Yep.
So on the one hand, you have the template text,
Yeah.
right, which is purely syntactic.
Oh,
It's just a string of symbols.
okay.
It's got the same ontological status as, like, any other
Okay.
bit of language.
So like the template text is just like a sentence or
Yeah.
a phrase or something. It's a concrete thing,
Okay.
or at least something that can be represented concretely.
Yeah, okay.
But then we have the side condition.
Right. The side condition
It's a different.
is a little more fuzzy.
It's more fuzzy.
Yeah.
So the side condition is not like a physical object or anything.
Right. It's more like
It's more like a rule.
a rule or an instruction or something. right?
Exactly. So the side condition is more abstract.
Yeah.
It dictates how we can fill in the template.
Right.
And so that's the mixed status. You
Yeah.
have this interaction between the concrete
Yeah.
syntactic template text
Okay.
and the abstract rule-like nature
Okay.
of the side condition.
I like to think about it like a recipe,
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
where it's like the ingredients are words and symbols,
Right.
and then the side condition is like the instructions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then the instance of the schema is like the finished dish.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy.
Okay, so then this distinction between the schema and its instances is really important.
It is.
Right? The schema isn't just like,
It's not just the collection of all its instances.
well, instances put together.
Right.
Yeah.
It's more like the blueprint or
Yeah.
recipe
Yeah.
for generating them.
That's like the thing that generates it,
Yeah.
not all the stuff that it's generating.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So this brings us back to like the ontological implications of schemas.
Right.
The Stanford Encyclopedia suggested that schemas might
Yeah.
help us be more economical with our ontological commitments
Right.
compared to second-order axioms.
Yes.
So can you unpack that a little bit?
So the idea is that by using schemas,
Yeah.
we might be able to avoid committing to the existence of these higher order entities,
Okay.
like properties and classes,
Okay.
which we see a lot in second order logic.
So like instead of having to posit the existence of like
Right.
this property of redness or whatever,
Right.
you can just use a schema
Maybe
that doesn't commit you to that.
that's the hope.
Okay, so schemas might give us a way to like
Yeah.
have these powerful logical tools
Right.
without having to buy into
Without having to buy into all this extra ontology.
all this like crazy ontology.
Right. It's a very appealing idea to a lot of philosophers.
Yeah, less is more,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
But figuring out exactly what the ontological commitments of schemas are
Yeah.
seems really hard.
It's a very subtle issue.
Yeah.
And it's one that philosophers are still debating.
Yeah, like is it just describing the world or is it like
Yeah.
creating these new entities?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Well,
Yeah.
I feel like we've already talked about so much.
I know we have.
We've talked about like the basic idea of schemas,
Right.
how they work in logic and math,
Yeah.
how they relate to truth,
Uh-huh. Yeah, and their ontological implications.
and like what they mean for what exists.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we haven't even talked about their history.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the history. Okay, so before we wrap up,
Okay.
let's talk about the history of schemas in logic.
All right.
Where did this idea come from?
Great question.
Okay, so schemas are not like some brand new thing in philosophy, right?
Right. No, they're not new at all.
They have a history.
They have a long history.
Yeah.
The term schema goes all the way back to Aristotle.
Really? I thought this was like a 20th century thing.
I know, it seems that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, Aristotle was using the term schema,
Okay.
but he wasn't using it in exactly the same way we use it today.
Right. Okay.
So he used schema in connection with his work on syllogisms.
Oh.
So his syllogistic figures, or schemata,
Okay.
served as templates for generating valid arguments.
So he was still using it as like a
Yeah.
template for reasoning.
It was a template, yeah, for reasoning.
Okay.
But the more formal and rigorous notion of schemas that we use today, that came later
Okay.
with the rise of formal logic in the 20th century.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so logicians like Tarski and Church, they were really instrumental in refining the concept
Okay.
and clarifying how schemas work.
So as logic got more formal, we needed like better tools.
Yeah, exactly.
And schemas were the tools.
Schemas were the right tool for the job.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, wow. I feel like we've covered so much
We have covered a lot.
about schemas.
Yeah, schemas are much more complicated than I think people realize.
Yeah, it's not just like,
Yeah.
oh, you just plug in a sentence here.
Right.
There's a lot more to it
There's a lot more to it.
than meets the eye.
Yeah. A lot more philosophical depth.
Yeah, a lot of like really interesting philosophical questions.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion.
So we've talked about how schemas
Yeah.
can allow us to express
Right.
infinite concepts
Even infinite concepts, yeah.
with finite language.
Right.
But does that mean that there's no limits
That's a great question.
to what we can express and understand with schemas?
Yeah. Are there some concepts that we just can't capture with the schema?
Yeah, are there some things that schemas just don't work for?
I don't know. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it's a question that philosophers are still thinking about.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Well, that's something for our listeners to think about.
Yeah, something to ponder.
And if any of our listeners want to learn more about schemas,
Yeah.
definitely check out the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on schema.
It's a great resource.
It is a great resource.
Yeah.
And yeah, so until next time, keep those philosophical gears turning.
Keep thinking about schemas.
Keep thinking about schemas
Yeah,
and all the other cool stuff in philosophy.
absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
It was great being here.
All right. See you next time.